China prepares for its next reusable rocket debut and booster landing attempt. NASA loses signal with one of its youngest Mars probes. Jared Isaacman's nomination for NASA administrator advances to the full Senate, and SpaceX wants to go public in 2026? All that and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. For a long time, SpaceX's CEO Elon Musk has repeatedly stated that SpaceX would never go public, that if anything, maybe Starlink could be spun off as its own public company once it achieves stable profitability. So what's happened all of a sudden for SpaceX to consider going public in 2026? Alright, so if you are not perpetually online like some of us, you may not have heard the news and you might be a little bit confused, and that's fine. That's why we have shows like This Week in Spaceflight, so that you can catch up on all of the news. So over the last few weeks, rumors started popping up in various outlets that SpaceX was considering a secondary share sale that would put its valuation at around $800 billion, more than double the last estimated valuation of the company. As it's still a private company, its valuation, share values, and other information like that is only known to private investors, so these valuations are often relying on leaks, rumors, and other kinds of behind-the-scenes talks. Along with these rumors, there were also some new ones pointing to SpaceX considering going public at some point in the second half of 2026. Elon quickly went on X to clarify what was being reported, saying, quote, "There has been a lot of press claiming SpaceX is raising money at $800 billion, which is not accurate. But the thing is, what was being reported was not that SpaceX was raising money, but rather that it was considering a share sale." As he states in the second paragraph of his post on X, quote, "SpaceX has been cash flow positive for many years and does periodic stock buybacks twice a year to provide liquidity for employees and investors," which is what was being reported. The post continued, stating that SpaceX's valuation depends on the progress of SpaceX's most valuable programs, citing a few examples. But as you may notice, there was no sign of him denying that SpaceX will go public. He did mention that part of the increase in valuation is due to, quote, "one other thing that is arguably most significant by far." One other thing. Well, that thing may very well be the reason for SpaceX to go public, and Elon already gave us a few clues a few weeks earlier. In late October, the SpaceX CEO commented on X about satellites for AI computing. In other words, AI data centers in space. After a few exchanges, he even declared SpaceX will be doing this. Over the following days and weeks, he's been defending this, stating really high goals for what the company could achieve based on the current Starlink architecture and satellite bus. He went all in discussing this, from how much power would be needed to how many satellites and how much computing they'd have to do to make all of this work. Although the idea of moving computing to satellites in space has been around in some shape or form for decades, in recent years it's seen a boom due to the increase in use of AI. Companies from all over the world are making plans to invest in AI computing from space, and there's already a test satellite in space trying it out with an NVIDIA chip. If the rumors are true, SpaceX would seek to go public at a $1.5 trillion valuation, and it would allow them to raise over $30 billion in the process. Investing in this technology will take a lot of initial money that SpaceX would need in a relatively short amount of time, which is what may have prompted this decision, and it's most likely that other thing that Elon made reference to. Fellow space reporter Eric Berger from Ars Technica wrote an article posing this theory as the reason for SpaceX to go public, and Elon replied on X, quote, "As usual, Eric is accurate." So the rumors may not be entirely unfounded given that comment. So does this mean that SpaceX is giving up on Mars? Well, it depends on who looks at this situation. Ever since the first rumors came out, there have been quite a whirlwind of reactions in social media about what will happen to SpaceX. Is SpaceX giving up on Mars? Is it a distraction? Or is this like Starlink that'll allow SpaceX to cash in more money to ultimately fund the Mars goal? But those aren't really questions for us to answer. In fact, they may be better suited for you to respond on your own, so you can leave your thoughts in the comments down below. But it is true that if this happens, SpaceX may be wider in scope. Early on, they were just a launch company, and then they became a satellite company, and who knows, with this addition, they may eventually also be a builder of AI data centers in space. As always, we'll keep watching and reporting as the events develop. Last week, we covered the maiden launch of Landspace's reusable Zhuche 3 rocket from China. While the first stage didn't land successfully, it did make it through re-entry and impacted very close to the target, presumably making it a lot easier for it to succeed on the next try. But as we said at the time, Juche-3 was nowhere close to being the only reusable rocket being developed from China. It just happened to be the first one to give it a try. Chinese company iSpace, for example, is also preparing its reusable Hyperbola 3 rocket. While the company has already performed hop tests of a subscale version of the rocket, it recently showed tests of the booster's grid fins, which will be used for its entry through the atmosphere. It's kind of funny, though, that this won't be the first rocket by iSpace to use grid fins. The company's Hyperbola 1 rocket uses grid fins on its first stage, but to steer it through ascent. Returning the booster will be pretty important, but delivering a payload to orbit is even more important. After all, it's how they'll make their money. This week, the company shared footage of the second stage auxiliary power system being tested. The system uses 16 thrusters to control the second stage's attitude while in space, to perform propellant settling burns, as well as to make small orbital corrections. If all goes well, iSpace should be debuting the Hyperbola 3 rocket in mid-2026, so we may see more progress from them in the coming months. On that long list of upcoming reusable rockets from China, the one that is definitely closest to launch is the Changzheng 12A. The rocket is a heavily modified sibling of the existing Changzheng 12 rocket. While the regular 12 uses kerosene as its fuel, the 12A uses methane. It also uses 7 Longyun 70 engines with 80 tons of force on the first stage, instead of the 4 YF100K engines with 127 tons of force each. Overall, the Changzheng 12A is expected to be able to launch about 9 tons to low Earth orbit in reusable configuration, which is a reusable performance similar to that of the Falcon 9 version 1.1 that flew between 2013 and 2016. The first flight vehicle has been spotted at the launch site for a few weeks already, but very much like its development, the progress towards its first launch is being conducted in high secrecy. So much so that the news for the week for this rocket is that it successfully completed its planned pre-launch static fire test, but we didn't hear it from official sources. You see, normally after a successful launch or major event, there tends to be a typical red screen of celebration at the Mission Control Center, a red banner on a screen often celebrating that the launch or the major event has been successful. Well, a few days ago, a Chinese engineer leaked a picture of said red screen for the successful static fire test of the Changzheng 12A. As with many other things relating to Chinese spaceflight progress, we often see rumors and leaks like this for various milestones, so while we don't officially recommend anyone doing this, at least we do kind of get to know what's going on. So the big mystery lately is, of course, when the launch will actually happen. I can assure you that there are several space nerds checking Notice to Mariners, Notice to Airmen, and many other types of hazard notices in order to spot the ones relating to this launch. And we just got notices indicating that the launch might happen no earlier than December 17th at 2 o'clock UTC. Once it happens, the first stage of Changzheng 12A will also attempt a landing downrange, similar to what Landspace did with its first Juche-3 rocket. Thanks to recently updated imagery on Google Earth, we can now see the landing zone for Changzheng 12A, including the logo of the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, who's the manufacturer of the rocket, confirming that it is in fact its landing pad. Another Chinese rocket set to debut at some point in the coming weeks is Space Pioneer's Tianlong 3. While its very first flight will not feature a booster return, the company is planning to fit landing legs and grid fins to later missions to eventually land it back on Earth. The rocket, which was made famous last year for accidentally flying off during a static fire test, successfully completed ground testing at the end of the summer. In November, the rocket went vertical at the launch site for the first time, presumably for pre-launch testing. But so far, we've had no updates on what might be going on with the rocket and why it hasn't launched yet. After a rumored rollback to the processing facility at Zhochuan, this past week it was once again observed to be vertical on its launch site on footage from launch preparations from a different launcher. Maybe this time it'll actually go through testing, or maybe it already went through those tests, but I guess it'll just be a matter of time until we find out. NASA's Perseverance rover has confirmed a long-suspected atmospheric phenomenon on Mars, the presence of electrical sparks and tiny sonic booms inside of Martian dust devils. The rover used its SuperCam microphone to capture the first direct audio evidence of these snaps as dust devils swept over it in Jezero Crater. The recordings include both the crackling of electrical discharge and the shock waves produced by the mini twisters. Scientists have theorized for decades that swirling Martian dust grains might become electrically charged through friction, but this is the first time the effect has been observed in action. Perseverance landed on the Martian surface in February of 2021 and is now almost 5 years into its mission. So far, the rover has detected 55 electrical events, 16 of which coincided with dust devils passing directly overhead. NASA says that this discovery has major implications for our understanding of the red planet and its climate. Electrical discharges could drive chemical reactions that alter atmospheric chemistry, creating compounds that could destroy organic molecules on the surface. The findings may even help to explain how Martian methane disappears so quickly and will now guide the design of future robotic and human explorations as NASA prepares for more ambitious missions to Mars. And now we shift from something that NASA has found to something that it has suddenly lost. NASA has unexpectedly lost contact with MAVEN, the orbiter that's been circling Mars for more than a decade. The Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution craft, or MAVEN for short, launched back in 2013 and arrived at Mars in September of 2014. It's now spent over 10 years studying the planet's upper atmosphere and how the red planet has gradually been losing its atmosphere to space. The orbiter also acts as a vital communications relay for rovers on the surface. All of its systems appeared to be working normally until last weekend when MAVEN passed behind the planet and briefly went out of contact. This is completely routine, but when it appeared on the other side, NASA's Deep Space Network heard, well, nothing. The orbiter simply didn't check back in. Engineers are currently investigating what might have happened during that brief blackout window on December 6th. NASA says more information will follow, but for now, MAVEN has fallen silent as teams on Earth work to re-establish contact. We're hoping MAVEN phones home again soon. And to round out our theme of things lost and found, NASA's Punch mission also captured something unexpected when it took a little punch of its own. The polarimeter to unify the corona and heliosphere, or PUNCH mission, consists of 4 suitcase-sized spacecraft that launched back in March. While testing one of their cameras, craft WFI-2 caught the moment that it was struck by a tiny micrometeoroid. Thankfully, the craft wasn't damaged, but the moment of impact produced a colorful cosmic fireworks show across its images. The fragments can be seen arcing through the instrument's wide field of view in the bottom left of this image as they're captured through 3 different polarizers. Impacts like these are common in low Earth orbit. In fact, we recently reported on a similar impact on the Shenzhou 20 spacecraft's window, but actually seeing the blow and the debris is rare. The good news is that Punch was built to withstand hits like this and remains fully operational, continuing its job of studying the solar wind and the outer corona. Now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting in the United States Senate. Last week, we covered Jared Isaacman's hearing to become the next NASA administrator at the Senate Committee on Science, Commerce, and Transportation. Well, following that hearing, the committee voted on whether to advance his nomination to the full Senate or not, and after being carried out this past Monday, December 8th, it resulted favorably for Isaacman with a vote of 18 to 10. Of the 18 votes for him, 15 came from every Republican on the committee, with Democrats Maria Cantwell, Tammy Duckworth, and John Fetterman providing the remaining 3. This committee vote in December is a bit different than when Jared had to go through all of this the first time around back in April. On April 30th, the committee had voted to advance his nomination to the full Senate, and it was 19-9 in his favor. 2 Democrats who had previously voted for him changed sides, while a different one changed their vote from a no to a yes on this latest one. Now the question is when the full Senate will be able to vote for Isaacman's nomination. Right now, the Senate schedule points to this happening at the beginning of the week, so perhaps by our next episode, Jared may already be the 15th administrator of NASA. As Isaacman's nomination moved on to the Senate, some key hardware was also on the move in California. Rocket Lab has officially shipped the Hungry Hippo fairing for its Neutron rocket to Launch Complex 3 at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport on Wallops Island in Virginia. This is a major milestone on the path to the rocket's maiden flight next year. The Hungry Hippo, as it's affectionately called, is the giant hinged fairing that opens like a mouth to release Neutron's second stage from inside. The fairing then closes so that the entire first stage, including the fairing, can return to land in one reusable piece on the company's recovery barge, Return on Investment. Before earning its ticket to Wallops, the fairing went through an intense qualification campaign, including fully integrated software and avionics checks. Engineers subjected the carbon composite structure to forces simulating the maximum aerodynamic pressure that Neutron will experience in flight, and mechanical loads were applied up to 125% of what the vehicle will encounter. The fairing halves were opened and closed under flight-like conditions in 1.5 seconds. That's less than half the time needed to complete stage separation and reorient the vehicle for its descent. All of this validated the design and proved that the mechanism is indeed ready for its debut. With qualification complete, the fairing and upper module started their journey to Wallops, where they'll next be attached to Neutron's first stage for pre-launch testing and static fires. Meanwhile, NSF's Micah Pizarka caught the second stage test stand for Neutron on the move down the Wallops Island Causeway this week. It won't be long before we see a Neutron rocket making the same journey on this transport trailer as it steps ever closer to the launch pad. Relativity Space has shared new footage as progress continues on its partially reusable Terran R rocket. With the vehicle's long-term future in mind, Relativity completed the Block 2 conceptual design review. This will build on the reusable Block 1 design with upgrades aimed at rapid reusability, increasing flight cadence, and reducing costs. On the production side, additional CNC machines and powder bed fusion printers have come online as the company expands the factory infrastructure needed for high-rate manufacturing. This month, the team has been running wind tunnel campaigns using a model of the first stage, testing re-entry aerodynamics with its movable grid fins. Meanwhile, hardware for Terran R's maiden flight continues to take shape. The first and second stage tanks are now complete, allowing focus to shift to the interstage. Welding is finished on both the forward and aft barrel sections, which now move into assembly. The completed first stage tank is now ready for integration, standing just under 50 meters long and consisting of 8 barrel sections and 3 domes. Acceptance testing is also wrapped on the second stage tank, which endured more than 30 structural load tests before being cleared for its own integration flow. Work continues on the thrust structure, where installation of the heat shield system is also underway. 2 more engines have been shipped for testing, 1 more for the first stage, and a development version of the vacuum-optimized engine for stage 2. These Eon engines kept the stand hot again this month at NASA's Stennis Test Center, wrapping up the initial test campaign for the Eon V vacuum engine. 13 Eon R engines will power Terran R's first stage, of which 2 have now completed acceptance testing, as a third prepares to begin its own campaign. Over at the Cape, infrastructure is also advancing at Launch Complex 16 as the site transitions from Terran 1 to Terran R architecture. The water tank is now mounted on its downcomer, progress is being made on the inside as well as the outside of the horizontal integration building, and 3 new liquid oxygen tanks have joined the tank farm. Looking ahead to a maiden launch late next year, Relativity has also announced a multi-launch agreement with SES. Terran R will deliver the operator's satellites directly into their final orbital positions. Axiom Space has completed the first uncrewed thermal vacuum test of its next-generation spacesuit, the Axiom Extravehicular Mobility Unit, or AX-EMU. This is the next-generation spacesuit designed for Artemis 3, NASA's first crewed lunar landing in more than 50 years. The test took place last month inside KBR's historic thermal vacuum chamber in San Antonio, the very same facility where Apollo astronauts once trained. Engineers exposed the suit to the hard vacuum of space and extreme swings in temperature to study how its advanced materials will handle the brutal conditions of the lunar South Pole. Axiom says that the data from this test will feed directly into readiness for surface operations, especially in preparation for working in permanently shadowed regions for up to 2 hours at a time. This is just the first in a series of increasingly complex tests and part of a broader campaign that's already included over 700 hours of crewed pressurized evaluations, including recent tests in NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Lab. For now, this milestone takes a giant leap closer to seeing astronauts walk on the lunar surface in brand new gear. This is your weekly space traffic report provided by Next Spaceflight, and this week was jam-packed. Over the last 7 days, we had a total of 12 launches, 7 of them from China and another 5 from SpaceX. Of the 7 from China, 3 of them were in support of the country's Guowang Internet satellite constellation. There were also 3 launches of experimental test satellites, as well as a rideshare mission on board a Kinetic 1 rocket that carried satellites for the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Nepal, In the case of SpaceX, 4 of its 5 launches this week were Starlink launches. One of them featured booster B1067 on its 32nd flight, once again breaking the record for most launches of a single Falcon booster. One of the other Starlink launches also broke the turnaround time record at Space Launch Complex 40, bringing it from the previous record of 55 hours, 29 minutes, and 10 seconds down to 50 hours, 44 minutes, and 55 seconds, about a 10% faster turnaround than the previous record. That faster turnaround was in part thanks to the fact that the previous mission from that launch pad was the NROL-77 mission. It featured a return-to-launch site landing for that booster, meaning the time between launches was only a matter of how fast the pad itself could be readied for launch, rather than having the additional waiting time for a drone ship to be ready for launch. NROL-77 was also SpaceX's 11th launch of the year in support of the US military, carrying on board what is believed to be a next-generation naval ocean surveillance system satellite. This week, we also had the return of the Soyuz MS-27 crew from the International Space Station. On board were Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Ryzhikov and Alexei Zubritsky, alongside NASA astronaut Johnny Kim. This was the 3rd flight into space for Ryzhikov, who now logs a total of 603 days in space. For Zubritsky and Kim, this was their 1st flight, so they've now each logged nearly 245 days in space from this single mission. This week, we also had a spacewalk on the outside of the Chinese Tiangong space station. The 8-hour spacewalk was conducted by astronauts Zhang Lu and Wu Fei, and during the activity, they installed space debris protection on the outside of the station and also replaced a multi-layer cover of the station's temperature control adapter. The crew also took images of the damaged glass in the porthole of the Shenzhou 20 spacecraft, which still remains on station. There's a chance that a future spacewalk could try to repair the damaged window before a safe, uncrewed return of the spacecraft for further analysis. To no one's surprise, next week will be just as active, if not more active, than this past week, and we'll also have a launch of pretty much every type of rocket. We've got up to 5 different Starlink launches by SpaceX, 3 of them from Florida and 2 from California. From the Cape, we'll also have the launch of ULA's Atlas V rocket, carrying a batch of Amazon LEO satellites into orbit. Needless to say, we'll be here live on NSF covering all of those Cape launches. Rocket Lab will once again try to launch the Raise and Shine mission from New Zealand, and is also setting up to launch an Electron mission from Wallops later in the week. Yes, an actual Electron launch to orbit, not a HASTE mission. Now that one's a lot closer to us than the New Zealand launches, so if you're interested in us covering that mission from Wallops, let us know in the comments. From French Guiana, we're also expecting the launch of an Ariane 6 rocket carrying a pair of Galileo navigation satellites into orbit. And if that wasn't enough, we'll even have the launch of a Proton rocket. Yes, Russia dusted off one of those old beasts, and it's getting ready for launch next week with the Electro-L No. 5 weather satellite. Next week, we're also hoping to see the debut of up to 3 different rockets. One of them, the Hanbit Nano rocket, is from South Korean company InnoSpace and is set to launch from Brazil. Another one is the Series 2 rocket from Galactic Energy, which is an upgraded variant of the company's existing Series 1 rocket that's been launching for the last few years. And of course, there's the Changzheng 12A rocket, which is also expected to debut hopefully in the next week or so, including its booster landing attempt. On top of all of that, we'll even have the launch of a new Shepard rocket carrying another 6 passengers to the edge of space and back. This one will include former SpaceX Vice President of Build and Reliability, Hans Koenigsmann, who will join Miki Benthaus, who will become the first person who uses a wheelchair to go into space. As always, with such frenetic activity in spaceflight, we recommend that you go to nextspaceflight.com or download the Next Spaceflight app so you can keep up to date on all of the launches and upcoming spaceflight events. And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. I'm Elysia Segal for NSF, and we'll see you all again next week to recap this week in spaceflight.